Welcome to Daryl's Beekeeping videos. I'm a master beekeeper and tonight's lesson is on hive feeders. Hive feeders range anywhere from an entrance feeder, which consists of a jar of some sort, usually a quart or half-gallon jar. It also has, as its name implies, an entrance part that goes under the hive body and sits on top of the bottom board. You can either get them in wooden bottom pieces, or you can get them as plastic bottom pieces, and again they all have some form of jar that you have to purchase separately. Inside the feeder you have a perforated lid that the jar screws onto, and then once you fill it with syrup you tilt it upside down, and then gravity and suction vacuum holds the fluid in, and then you slide it in the entrance of a hive. This is very common to get as part of a hive kit if you buy it. Pros and cons to this is it's cheap. It's about $5 for one of these. The cons outweigh the pros though. When you use an entrance feeder, it causes robbing a lot of times from other bees in the other area from other hives will smell the syrup, or if you've got a syrup additive such as Honeybee Healthy added to it, that can attract other bees and it can cause a lot of robbing at the front of the entrance of your hive. So most beekeepers, master beekeepers, and experienced beekeepers do not recommend that you get or use one of these entrance feeders. The only purpose that I've ever used this for is if you have a case of nosema in your hives. Basically the bees have diarrhea. It's caused by a microsporidium. This is an excellent way to fill your jar with water and then add water directly to the colony. You can also, in the time of hot weather, you could actually just fill the jar full of water, no syrup, no sugar, and also add that as part of the entrance, again just to give the bees some water directly at the source of their entrance of their hive. So those are basically the only two purposes I have found that are good to use this for. Otherwise they're not very good because, like I said, they cause robbing. Plus again, you have a glass jar, which if it falls over you can have broken glass in your apiary, and that's never a good thing to do. Plus, because it is only a quart to a half-gallon, if you're lucky to find a half-gallon size jar, then it's limited of the amount of sugar that you can use to feed them. So you're constantly going to be filling these. I've had, when I first started out beekeeping, like most beekeepers, I started off with one of these, and I was filling these about every day because they don't hold that much. And again, I personally don't like it simply because of the fact that there's glass, and if it falls over, I can have glass in it. The next step up might be a division board feeder, which, as its name implies, it takes the place of 1 to 3 frames depending on the width of this. These can be as wide as 3 inches or so, again, so it can displace 1 to 3 of your frames. When you get these, they come either as an open piece without this cap and ladder system, or they have this cap and ladder system that you have. This one I believe is from Man Lake or Dayton. I can't remember which one I got it from, but it is a cap and ladder system. If you use a division board feeder, again it just fits in the hive and you feed it in like this. You want to get one that has this cap and ladder system. Cap means there is some kind of obstruction on top that keeps the bees from going in and drowning as easily. Bees are great flyers. They are horrible swimmers, so if they get trapped in the syrup, they're going to drown. So this cap system helps prevent your bees from accidentally drowning. The ladder portion is some kind of ladder system. This particular one has a removable perforated piece of plastic tubing that the bees can use, as its name implies, a ladder to crawl down and get to the syrup and feed. You're going to get bee kills with all types of feeders, regardless of which feeder you choose. Just some are better than others. The advantage to this is because it is an in-hive feeder, you can simply open up the hive, take a funnel, put it in this little hole, and then pour your syrup into that, and you're only feeding the bees in this column, that colony that you are putting the division board feeder in. The disadvantage is because you now have to open up the hive, and everybody and his neighbor around it can smell that syrup. They can actually come in and fly in. You can incite robbing as part of that. So again, I do not use a division board feeder, but I do know beekeepers who do love them. The other advantage for it is because this is inside the colony, it's a warmer atmosphere for it versus having a community feeder, which I'll talk about in a little bit. Next up the chain is a Hive Top Feeder. As its name implies, it would sit on top of your hive. This is a 5-frame, obviously this is an 8-frame box, but you kind of get the point. It sits up on top. There are several different types of Hive Top Feeders. This one is by Dayton. This used to be my favorite type of Hive Top Feeder until I discovered the Miller feeder. And the reason I like this particular type of feeder is it has a slot in the center that the bees can come up through, and then from there they can go into one of the 2 feed chambers. What's neat about this is you have 2 separate feed chambers, so you could actually fill one with water or one with syrup, and the other one with, again, syrup, or you could put a part of a pollen patty in there. So you could use the chambers separately and feed your bees however you want, or you can fill both of them with syrup. The disadvantage with this particular type of feeder is it has a floating mechanism. So as you can see, I'll pull it a little closer to the camera. You can see that it has a platform and then some pieces of wood on the bottom to help keep this off the bottom of the feeder. Now you can put this in upside down. Again, it's not really a wrong way per se, but if you have it flipped upside down with these solid pieces of wood, these spacer woods up, when that syrup dries out, it can cause this thing to stick to the bottom. So what you have to do is you have to take your hive tool and go against the edges, not against this thin portion of the wood, go against the edge of the wood to pry it off. So what you want to do is make sure that these solid pieces of wood, these spacers, are facing down so it's easier to pry it off, and you don't have as much glued down with the syrup. Again, it's not a bad feeder. It's just because it does have that floating device. When you go to fill the syrup in it, you can cause the syrup to push some of the bees down under and then drown underneath this platform. So that's the main reason why I don't like this. But what I do like it, again, is that you do have 2 separate chambers, and again, you can fill one with syrup and then the other one with either syrup, water, or a pollen patty, should you choose to. So it's not a bad choice, but it's just not my favorite. Next up the chain is a Miller feeder. Now a Miller feeder is, by its name, is made by, was first designed by a man named Miller. Most of our hive components get their names after whoever first invented them. So this is again a Hive Top feeder, and what it does, it has a chamber, a slot in the very top. I'll pull it a little closer. So its slot is at the top, and I'll roll it over, and then you can see it has a syrup chamber, and then it has this wire mesh cage that keeps the bees from getting in where the syrup is. And you really can't see it in this video a little bit, but if you look deep under this screen, there is another screen that's on that piece of wood that my finger's now on, and what that does is that acts as a ladder system for the bees to come up. As they come up through that slot, they can go over that ladder and down to the syrup and have a ladder to work on, much similar to the ladder system that we had in the division board feeder. Now when you put this Miller feeder on, you have to make sure that the front portion, which has that slot that the bees come up from, is facing toward the hive. Remember, when you put your hives on a hive stand, you want to have the rear of the hive elevated slightly, typically about an inch or about the thickness of a 1x material, which is actually 3/4 of an inch. And the reason for that is you want the syrup to go downhill and be able to get to it. Whereas if I had this thing flipped around and it's facing, this screening is facing to the rear of the hive, all the water, all the syrup is going to go down toward the lowest end of the thing, which is away from where they can get to it. So make sure that you do put this on. Now, again, as I said it earlier, this is actually my favorite type of feeder, the Miller Hive Top Feeder, because these typically hold anywhere from a gallon to 3 gallons in and of themselves, depending on the width, whether you've got an 8 frame, a 10 frame, this is a 5 frame, and depending on manufacturer, how deep they make it. So again, I think most of mine are made by my local bee supplier, and I think he makes it where his are about, for 8 frame, typically hold about 1.5 gallons or so to 2 gallons. I can't remember what they actually were. But again, it holds a lot of syrup. And as I was telling you before, that bees are great flyers or horrible swimmers. So while they can't get to the syrup directly because they're coming up through the slot, once the bees smell that syrup, especially if you do it the way I do, where I add Honeybee Healthy to it to add it as a syrup preservative and also act as an attractant for the honeybees, what they'll do is they'll come out of the hive, they'll fly up, and they'll come up and they'll get in this portion in the feed chamber. So what I do, and I don't have one here to show it to you, I have a ventilated inner cover, which is basically a screen, and I put this on top of it, and then I pour the syrup through that screen into, excuse me, into the syrup chamber, and that keeps the honeybees from getting in there and drowning. And then lastly, you have a community feeder, which is a bucket feeder, and I'll post a video in my final video. I have a video on how to make a bucket feeder that is to be used outside of the hive only, simply because it drips a lot. But again, I can feed, make up 2.5 gallons, excuse me, to 5 gallons at a time, and feed them in a community feeder. And then one last, what I call a gimmicky type of hive feeder is sold on Amazon and also at my local bee supply. In Moore County, it's Midnight Bee Supply. But it's a neat, inexpensive feeder. This is an entrance feeder. And what this is I'll pull it a little closer where you can see it. It has a spot, and you can see the water dripping out of it where I did test it a little bit ago, make sure it works. But it has a spot that is made for some kind of bottle, either Coke bottle or 2-liter Coke bottle. And again, it does work. I actually filled it up a little bit ago, and I'll have a video, or excuse me, a photo of it with the water filled up, and by the suction of the water inside this bottle, it actually kept the syrup out. It came in, the syrup came down, filled this little trough, and then it didn't run out, didn't run over top of the edge. So it does have applications. Again, I personally would probably only use this, again, if I had a case of nosema in my hives and I needed to feed them fresh water to help combat the nosema, or during the summer where I could use this for a water source directly at the hive instead of having the bees go out and hopefully not mess with my wives' horse troughs. But again, this is a neat little trick feeder. They're not bad. They're, I think, a couple bucks on Amazon. Again, Midnight Bee Supply in Bass has them. If you were to use this as an entrance feeder in lieu of one of these type of entrance feeders, it does have a pro in that now you are using a plastic bottle vice a metal jar. So again, you don't have to worry about glass being broken in your apiary. The other thing, what I like about it, one of the few things I like about it, is if you're going to use this, it doesn't take up a whole lot of space. You can have, again, you can put up to a 2-liter bottle on this and provide a lot of water in there, so you don't have to worry about it. If you did use this as an entrance feeder with syrup, again, I highly discourage it, but should you use it, what I would do is I would use this with an entrance reducer on my hive and then slide this through that small hole on the entrance reducer, a wooden entrance reducer, just to keep the robbing down. But because you do that, you've now plugged that hole. What I would do is I would modify that entrance reducer, and I would go out and cut another slot, small slot that the bees can come in and out of at the opposite end. So if this were, just pretend for a second, that if this were my slot on this end of my entrance reducer, I'd cut another slot on the other end of the entrance reducer, or simply cut the entrance reducer off about a 3/8 inch or so, or maybe a 1/2 inch off the end of the entrance reducer. So that way you have a space at the opposite end of where this feeder is going to be to allow the bees to go in and out, and it minimizes the chance of robbing, simply because that feeder is now protected by the wood, and the guard bees can guard the entrance at the opposite end of that wooden entrance reducer. Again, I probably wouldn't use it for syrup, but if you want to, it's an inexpensive choice. Again, with a Coke bottle, either this 16 ounce or a 2-liter Coke bottle, it's a good option. What I like it for better is maybe to introduce water. So those are my various entrance reducers. Again, I'll have a posted video on the photo on the community hive feeder, and I also have a video on it where it talks about the community hive feeder stand that I have. So it's a quick lesson on hive feeders, and thank you for your time. Have a great day.